At the end of the day, the nation's physical and economic health depend on getting COVID-19 under control. That must take priority. We can't let any type of company try to exploit the situation.
You're listening to Law and the Pandemic, a production of UC Hastings Law School and its Center on Legal Technology and Innovation, LexLab. We're your co-hosts. I'm Drew Amerson.
And I'm Arika Smith. Today we talked to Professor Robin Feldman about the potential hurdles to the development and distribution of a COVID-19 vaccine. Professor Feldman's work focuses on the role of intellectual property law and technology, as well as drug pricing and healthcare law. Her most recent book is Drugs, Money, and Secret Handshakes: The Unstoppable Growth of Prescription Drug Prices.
Thank you for joining us today, Professor Feldman. We really appreciate you taking the time. And the first question we have for you is, today, according to data compiled by Johns Hopkins University, we surpassed the 1 million confirmed cases of coronavirus in the United States mark. Now, we've heard from medical experts it's going to take a year to a year and a half at least before we have a vaccine that's ready to go to market. We're hoping that you can help us understand why it takes that long to get a vaccine ready for market.
Well, the global hunt is on for a vaccine, and the key will be to do it as quickly and efficiently as possible. That's not easy. Fighting a pandemic is like fighting a war. It requires a wartime mobilization effort. In particular, developing a successful vaccine will require extraordinary partnerships. Universities and startups generally provide the most innovation in pharmaceuticals. Large companies have the experience, the resources for clinical trials and federal approvals. Then the FDA can fast-track approvals. The federal government needs to allocate funds and coordinate efforts, assign personnel. All of these actors have to work smoothly and efficiently together. That is challenging, but we can do it.
You mentioned that the FDA could fast track. So I'm curious, given your expertise, what sort of regulatory hoops might we be looking at, and what sort of red tape should we be looking to cut to get this moving?
One of the key opportunities in any crisis is to figure out what you need in terms of regulation, what you don't need, and what you can learn from that. It is very important to make sure that any vaccine that gets to market is safe and effective. We don't want to see people who have their hopes dashed because we give them a vaccine and it doesn't work, or who have side effects that are problematic. We need something to work, and we need it to work right. At the same time, the FDA needs to, and I assume they will, prioritize this over all kinds of other things that the FDA is doing, all kinds of other types of disease treatments. This has to come first, and they've got to move it effectively and do everything they can to work with companies and help them move through the clinical trials and very complicated approval systems as smoothly as possible.
So you do all of this, and then how much is it going to cost, especially considering the amount of mobilization, the partnership? Is it going to be affordable for people?
We need to make sure that pharma companies don't take advantage of the crisis. There are some indications that could happen, and we certainly have indications that has happened in the past. Let me give you a couple of examples. So in early March, when COVID-19 was already raging worldwide, Gilead filed for orphan drug status on its drug remdesivir as a treatment for COVID-19. Now, orphan drug status is intended for drugs serving tiny populations. It operates like a mini patent, and then Gilead could block anyone from making the drug for 7 years. And that helps them keep the price up. The FDA actually granted orphan drug status to Gilead a few weeks later. Under intense public pressure, Gilead relinquished its rights, which really would have driven the price of that particular treatment, if it turned out even to be effective, out of reach for so many people. In the past, we've seen pharma companies actively try to keep lower-priced vaccines off the market. So 3 years ago, Sanofi paid $61.5 million to settle an antitrust lawsuit related to its vaccines. The suit alleged that when a competing company planned to enter the market to compete against Sanofi's pediatric meningitis vaccine, Menectra, Sanofi charged prices 34% higher on vaccines that still had patent protection unless buyers agreed to pay all of Sanofi's vaccines exclusively. That kind of behavior is deeply problematic under the antitrust system, and it's also problematic when you have a health crisis. And again, moving back to today, we've already seen during the COVID-19 pandemic companies trying to block others from making tests. At the end of the day, the nation's physical and economic health depend on getting COVID-19 under control. That must take priority. We can't let any type of company try to exploit the situation.
So you mentioned that Gilead relinquished its orphan drug status for remdesivir due to intense public pressure. Do you anticipate there needing to be that sort of public pressure for whatever vaccine ends up proving to be useful for coronavirus? Or should that just be baked into the structure right now?
I hope that the Gilead example will be a lesson for other companies, but our system is not set up to make vaccines, medicines, treatments, all of those things together available at prices that everyone can afford. When Health and Human Secretary Alex Azar was asked before Congress earlier last month whether the COVID-19 vaccine, if it becomes available, would be made available to everybody that they could, regardless of whether they could pay for it, he wasn't able to assure Congress that the answer was yes. He was reflecting the system that we have now. Government needs to change that system and make sure everyone gets access and can afford it.
Yeah, it certainly seems that from a public health standpoint, we need everyone to have the vaccine. So I hope that does happen.
I hope so as well.
How can the government do that? What can the government do to make the drug accessible and affordable?
Well, there are a variety of ways government can step in here. The easiest way is to open up its wallet and buy things, but even the government's coffers are not endless. There's a limit to how much money we have sitting in Washington. There are other ways the government can do it as well, and those are methods of exerting the government's own rights to have an impact on what companies can do and what they can charge for the intellectual property rights they have. Most of the drugs that are out there today were funded with federal money at some point, even if it's just at the initial stages. In fact, one study showed that all of the something like 280 new drugs that were approved by the FDA a few years ago all had federal money at some point in their pipeline. That federal money comes with the ability to exercise federal rights in certain circumstances. And there are other provisions within the intellectual property system that allow the government to step in. Government rarely does that, but this is an unusual circumstance.
Let's say we hit that timeline. It's a year from now. There's a vaccine ready to go to market. Is our job done here? Are we finished?
COVID-19 is not the last pandemic or epidemic, nor are viruses the only threats. As I explained in a Washington Post op-ed last fall, diseases such as drug-resistant bacteria, not to mention viruses, present an enormous threat to worldwide health, while research in the space has been steadily declining. There's a UK study from 4 years ago concluding that antibiotic-resistant bacteria may be responsible for as many as 10 million deaths per year by 2025. And yet the U.S., the world, have dangerously shifted away from research into these areas despite the looming global threats. With COVID-19, the consequences of that shift are hitting home a lot sooner than I expected when I wrote that in the Washington Post last fall. Our nation can't afford to be just reactive, shutting down when outbreaks occur and scrambling. We have to be prepared. We have to think ahead, not just react now, but think ahead for what the future holds.
So I understand you have a research project that our listeners could participate in. Could you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So we are looking at certain key issues within the COVID-19 pandemic, hoping that we can learn something from it as academics and for policymakers as well. So my Center for Innovation has launched a survey that will proceed by text message, and we are hoping that people will be willing to join other participants across the country to help us study how healthcare information flows during a pandemic and access to medicine and healthcare. The study does pay a small amount, by the way, and it answers short text messaging surveys. We hope people will join us.
Professor Feldman, I want to give you one chance to have the last word. Is there anything else you wanted to mention today?
I think what I would say is we are extraordinarily strong and creative as a nation. We have undertaken these kinds of efforts before, historically. During World War II, the nationwide effort launched the entire penicillin industry and changed the way we approach drug treatment and drug development. It will take something like that effort now, but we know what to do and we can do it.
On that note, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
For more information and additional resources related to this episode, please visit our website at www.uchastings.edu/pandemic.
And while you're there, you can check out all the episodes in this series. Thanks for listening.